Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Cristina Mislan. She is an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. Hi, Cristina.
Hello, Sonali.
CIA Director John O'Brennan has finally spoken out about the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the torture of post-9/11 war prisoners. Addressing the press yesterday, the embattled agency head vehemently defended a program that included letting prisoners freeze to death, violating their bodies in what amounted to rape, threatening to kill their loved ones, and wrongfully imprisoning people who have no connection to terrorism or crime. Mr. Brennan insisted CIA officers were, quote, patriots. He denounced the report as flawed, partisan, and frustrating. Former President George H.W. Bush also came to the defense of an agency he had once directed, saying CIA officers were, quote, unheralded, selfless, and the very finest people. He made no mention of his own son, George W. Bush's role as president overseeing the CIA during its torture program. Cristina, how interesting has it been for you to see these various U.S. leaders justify this torture and the rape and the killing with such defiance?
You know, part of me, I tell myself that I shouldn't be surprised. And by telling myself I shouldn't be surprised, that would actually allow me to see that these are really just comments of people whose interests are at stake, and whose interests are more important than the question about human rights, at least in their eyes. But what we're seeing here, what I believe what we're seeing, is a system that not only continues to protect itself, but one that is far removed from the U.S. American public. And I think about all of the Hollywood films I've recently seen on particularly political thrillers, when they usually get dismissed as kind of conspiracy theories. But one of the things that Noam Chomsky tells us is that these so-called conspiracy theories are not conspiratorial at all. So these stories that we see on film and on screen are actually happening, and U.S. actions continue to show that to us over and over again, that these aren't conspiracies at all. These are actually things that happen, and we should not be surprised.
Not everyone in Washington, D.C. lacks a conscience. A major walkout yesterday afternoon by black congressional staffers in the nation's capital made a strong statement against police violence aimed at African Americans. More than 100 staffers gathered on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building to add their voices to the growing ranks of protesters around the U.S. On the other side of the U.S., Richmond, California's police chief, Chris Magnus, made news when he joined protesters and held a sign saying hashtag Black Lives Matter. Chief Magnus told press it was important for police to be, quote, protecting people's constitutional rights. Under his unusual approach to policing that actually involves working with the community, crime rates have dramatically dropped. Meanwhile, in Ferguson, Missouri, the epicenter of anti-police brutality protests, activists won a major victory in court this week against the indiscriminate use of tear gas by police. Cristina, you're in Missouri. How has Ferguson changed the national conversation on police brutality?
Right now, Ferguson is a fascinating point of conversation, but it's also a site of resistance. And one of the things that I think is really changing our conversation about issues like police brutality is how that resistance is actually happening. So I was able to join last week's NAACP marchers to the Capitol in Jeff City. And with the union of NAACP marchers and younger Ferguson protesters, I was able to see a conversation that emerged that really questioned what we are suggesting as solutions. So, for instance, the idea that voting would be some sort of kind of all-encompassing solution, or using cameras. And what we're seeing over and over is that these are not solutions that are going to completely eliminate police brutality, right? And as one person said in that conversation, we've been voting for 50, 60 years, but not much has changed.
Right.
So I think that's part of the national conversation. What are these solutions?
And then finally, the Justice Department yesterday announced it would no longer pursue cases of pot cultivation or sales conducted on Native American reservations, even in cases where it is illegal in the state that the reservation is on. In addition to being a victory for marijuana legalization, the move also underscores the fact that indigenous communities have sovereign lands. It was a fact seemingly lost on Arizona's Republican Representative Paul Gosar, who at a recent town hall meeting referred to Native Americans as, quote, wards of the state. The phrase offended tribal leaders, including Phil Stago of the White Mountain Apache tribe, who said he kind of revealed the true deep feeling of the federal government. Tribes, you can call yourselves sovereign nations, but when it comes down to the final test, you're not really sovereign, end of quote. Representative Gosar has yet to retract his statement, and one of his fellow Republicans lashed out at the fact that people found it offensive, saying that Stago's statement amounted to race baiting. Cristina, how do you respond to that?
Well, and that comment won't be retracted. And so we shouldn't at all be surprised that yet again, another white politician accuses a non-white person of race baiting. It's one of the most annoying things ever. But the conversation here really is reflective of this historical legacy in this country, which is to deny indigenous communities real sovereignty. And really, this is an issue that extends way beyond U.S. borders. There's a global movement right now, both on the part of multinational corporations, including oil industry, and indigenous communities who wish to preserve their lands and their livelihoods. So the real issue has nothing at all to do with the race baiting, but it's a conversation about the ability for Native communities to protect their land and that land that's being pillaged by these multinational corporations.
Cristina, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Cristina Mislan is an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.